They handed my life's work to a 23-year-old intern and called it innovation. I built the system that kept their billion-dollar platform alive, and overnight, I became invisible. They said I should mentor the new face of the project. Instead, I documented everything and waited. This isn't just a story about losing your job. It's about what happens when the person you erased decides to take back everything. Stay with me until the end. Then tell me in the comments if you've ever been replaced, and subscribe if you believe quiet people can be the most dangerous. I used to believe hard work spoke for itself, that if I showed up early, stayed late, and built something no one else could, someone up there would notice. They didn't. My name is Tracy Langford, Senior Systems Architect at Aetherion Analytics, a company that loves words like innovation and disruption more than it loves the people who make those words real. For years, I lived on caffeine and adrenaline, holding our fragile infrastructure together while executives congratulated themselves for visionary leadership. I wasn't a visionary, apparently. I was just the one keeping their vision from collapsing. Every quarter, they rolled out new slogans: empower the future, invent tomorrow, think beyond, while my small team and I quietly worked through weekends patching code that kept their future from freezing mid-demo. I didn't complain. Complaints were currency wasted in a place like Aetherion. People who spoke up vanished from the org chart in quiet Friday updates. So I kept my head down and let my work do the talking. And my work had a voice. It screamed reliability, precision, elegance. I'd built a predictive analytics engine that had reduced client churn by nearly 40%. I wrote the architecture myself, layer by layer, documenting everything because I learned early that documentation was a shield. You could rewrite memory, but you couldn't rewrite metadata. That's what made me valuable. At least, I thought it did. Ethan Voss, our CEO, was the kind of man who could talk for 20 minutes without saying anything. He had a gift for making mediocrity sound profound, for turning corporate failure into a lesson about embracing agility. I used to watch him in meetings, gesturing like a preacher, talking about empowering youth, and I'd wonder how someone so allergic to responsibility managed to keep his job. The answer was simple. He was good at being seen. I wasn't. I stayed behind the curtain designing frameworks while others took bows. I remember one company retreat in Tahoe when Ethan toasted our incredible leadership team. My name wasn't on the slide, even though half those metrics were built on my architecture. People clapped anyway. That's when I realized meritocracy was a fairy tale told to keep us compliant. Still, I believed in the work. Building systems gave me control in a world that didn't. I could make logic behave, make data obey rules humans ignored. It was the closest thing to fairness I knew. My small apartment downtown became an extension of the office, a second workstation, a graveyard of coffee cups, and the constant hum of code running overnight tests. Friends called less. I answered even less. I told myself it was temporary, that this was the final push before recognition, before stability. I just needed one project, one undeniable success to force them to see me. That project would be Helios, the system that changed everything. At least that's what I thought before I learned that in Ethan's world, even light could be stolen. Helios started as a spark in my head during a midnight system crash. I was staring at the endless cascade of error logs when it hit me. Our entire infrastructure wasn't broken. It was blind. We were constantly reacting instead of anticipating. I wanted to build something that could see around corners, predict bottlenecks before they existed, and give clients answers before they even asked the questions. That night, I opened a blank repository and named it Helios, not for mythology, but because I wanted something that burned through darkness. I spent the next 6 months living inside that idea. Helios wasn't just code, it was intuition rendered in data. I built it to read operational noise, find the signal, and learn. I fought every obstacle: outdated servers, underfunded budgets, and the quiet resistance of managers who didn't understand what they were approving. I pitched it to Ethan once, in the middle of a quarterly strategy session. He nodded halfway through, the way people nod when they're pretending to listen, and said, "Let's revisit after we get alignment." That meant no, so I built it anyway, piece by piece, off the books at first, using leftover compute cycles and borrowed interns who still believed the company cared about ideas. By month 3, I had something real, a self-learning architecture that could automate half of what our analysts did manually. When I presented it again, Ethan's tone changed. "That's promising," he said. "Let's call it an internal innovation pilot." I knew what that meant, too. He'd take credit when it worked and disown it when it didn't. But I didn't care. I just wanted Helios to live. I pulled in 2 developers from different divisions, both tired of fixing Ethan's broken promises, and we formed an unofficial team. We called ourselves the Basement 3 because our workspace was a converted storage room near the server racks. It smelled like dust and ambition. Nights blurred into mornings. We tested predictive modules on mock client data, refining the accuracy until it was almost eerie. Helios didn't just monitor performance, it foresaw failure. When a supplier's API lagged or a dataset went stale, it rebalanced load automatically. For once, the system didn't need a human hero to save it. When we rolled out the prototype internally, people thought it was magic. Departments reported efficiency gains of 30% in less than 2 months. Clients noticed. A division head from Meridian Group sent me a handwritten note, actual ink, saying Helios made their forecasting finally make sense. That letter stayed taped to my monitor. It was proof that somewhere beyond the office walls, the work mattered. And then, for a brief moment, Ethan acted impressed. He forwarded a client email to the executive channel with one line: "Incredible progress. Big thanks to the Helios team." It wasn't much, but it was something. My name wasn't mentioned, but I could live with that. Recognition didn't have to be public. It just had to be real. Still, I kept documenting every change, every approval, every vendor conversation. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I'd seen it happen before. To Natalie in compliance, to Kevin in ops, to anyone who made their manager look expendable. Aetherion rewarded loyalty only when it didn't threaten ego. The deeper Helios integrated, the more I realized it had become inseparable from me. Every line of logic mirrored my thought process. Every module carried my fingerprints. It wasn't just a product, it was proof I existed beyond their metrics. When the first client renewal came through explicitly citing Helios as the reason, I felt something close to pride. For the first time in years, I believed I'd built something untouchable. I didn't know it yet, but that belief was the first illusion they were about to destroy. It began with an email sent at 9:47 a.m. on a Monday. Subject line: Team Alignment, Helios Next Steps. No one likes those corporate phrases. They always sound harmless until they aren't. The message came from Ethan's assistant, inviting me to a strategic announcement. My stomach tightened. No reason given, no agenda attached. Just a time and a room number. I walked in 5 minutes early and immediately knew something was off. The long glass table was set for a full leadership team, and the projector screen displayed the Helios logo, the one I designed myself at 2 a.m. over takeout noodles. Ethan stood at the front, suit too crisp for a normal Monday, grinning like a man about to unveil a miracle. Beside him was someone I didn't recognize. Young, perfectly styled, expensive haircut, glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having failed. "Team," Ethan began, "I'm thrilled to introduce a new era for Helios." The room hummed with polite applause. "Meet Liam Kent, our new Director of Innovation." Director. My pulse stuttered. The kid couldn't be older than 23. Liam just finished his graduate work at Stanford, specializing in scalable business ecosystems. Ethan continued. He'll be leading the Helios initiative into its next phase. I waited for the punchline that didn't come. People looked from Ethan to me and back, realizing what this meant. I was being replaced in real time. "Tracy," Ethan said finally, "you'll be essential during this transition. Liam will rely on your deep knowledge of the system. You're the backbone of this success." Backbone. The invisible structure no one ever credits until it breaks. I managed a nod, the kind you give when the only other option is screaming. Liam flashed a smile, earnest, maybe even well-intentioned. "I've read your documentation," he said brightly. "It's incredible work. I can't wait to learn from you." Learn from me, then lead me. The contradiction almost made me laugh. Ethan continued his speech about fresh perspectives and next-generation leadership, the same empty buzzwords he'd been spouting since I joined. Every sentence felt like a slow-motion erasure. By the time the meeting ended, Helios was no longer mine. It belonged to a narrative built for investors. Young blood, bold vision, the illusion of progress. I left the room last, each step deliberate, steady. I'd learned to wear calm like armor. Back at my desk, the messages started coming. "You okay? Did you know about this? What the hell just happened?" I typed one response to all of them. "I'm fine." I wasn't. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the Helios dashboard glowing on my laptop screen. My creation, now under someone else's name. I thought about the years I'd poured into this company, the birthdays I'd missed, the quiet moments of pride I'd traded for another line of code. And for what? So Ethan could hand it to a kid whose biggest contribution so far was existing at the right time with the right pedigree. I poured myself a drink and opened a blank document titled Contingencies. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance. I listed every vendor I'd brought on board, every clause I'd negotiated, every access credential tied to my name. Helios ran through relationships, not just code. I'd built trust with clients who knew me, not the company. Without me, those bridges didn't exist. I wasn't plotting yet, just documenting. But the act of writing steadied me. It reminded me that what they saw as replaceable was actually irreplaceable. Over the next few days, Liam shadowed me, eager and oblivious. He asked questions that revealed how little he understood. He wanted to gamify the user experience and integrate influencer branding. I explained calmly that our clients were enterprise executives, not teenagers downloading apps. He nodded like he understood, then suggested we add badges for productivity milestones. I smiled because it was easier than explaining why stupidity dressed in enthusiasm was still stupidity. The team pretended everything was fine, but I saw their eyes flick toward me in meetings, silent apologies they couldn't voice. When the first board presentation came around, Ethan announced that Liam would lead the pitch. I spent 3 days building the slide deck he'd present. When he walked into the room with my work under his arm, it felt like watching someone wear your skin. He stumbled through technical questions. Ethan filled the gaps, and afterward the company email celebrated Liam's leadership and vision. My name didn't appear. That was the moment the last illusion cracked. Recognition wasn't coming. Fairness wasn't coming. I'd built Helios from the ground up, and now I was expected to teach my replacement how to steal it gracefully. I closed my laptop, stared out my office window, and felt the quiet click of something inside me breaking. Not the kind of break that destroys, but the kind that decides. The days after that presentation felt like walking through fog. Every sound muted, every glance from coworkers half pity, half fear. I went through the motions. Meetings, reports, progress check-ins, pretending not to notice how my role had quietly shrunk while Liam's calendar overflowed with leadership summits. Ethan made sure to copy him on every client thread, introducing him as the future of Helios. The words tasted like rust. Liam, for his part, tried to play friendly. He'd swing by my desk with questions that should have been easy. What server handled predictive caching? Which vendor provided our fallback API? And I'd answer without emotion, because if I showed any, it would be twisted into resistance to change. He called me mentor in meetings. The others called me support. I called myself done. But I stayed silent because I'd seen how this game was played. You don't fight power directly. You let power collapse under its own incompetence. So I waited. My work became invisible even as the chaos began to surface. Helios had been precise because I was precise. The moment Liam started tinkering, rearranging workflows, approving flashy interface redesigns without understanding dependencies, the system began to groan under the weight of bad decisions. I warned him once, gently. Changing the sequence here will break the integration with the client dashboard. He smiled like a teacher indulging a nervous student. "Don't worry, I've got a handle on it." He didn't. By Friday, the dashboard froze during a client demo. Ethan called it a minor hiccup in his weekly report, but I saw the panic behind his perfect smile. The cracks were showing, and for the first time, I didn't rush to patch them. That weekend, I went home and slept through Saturday, the first full night's sleep I'd had in months. When I woke up, I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and realized I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. On Monday, Ethan held a team meeting to rebuild confidence. He spent 40 minutes talking about embracing challenges and trusting new leadership. Liam nodded solemnly beside him. I kept my expression neutral, a skill I'd perfected from years of swallowing pride. As soon as the meeting ended, I returned to my desk and started cleaning out files, not deleting, just organizing. Every critical note, every design log, every client conversation was stored safely off the company network in encrypted archives I controlled. Knowledge was my weapon, and I was done handing it out for free. That afternoon, a coworker named Nadia slipped me a note during a team call. "He's presenting to investors next month." I read it twice. My heartbeat slowed. So that was their plan. Use my system, my data, my years of unpaid overtime to sell a future built on a lie. I smiled, not out of bitterness, but clarity. Let them. Helios would reveal the truth on its own. You can't fake stability. You can't brand competence. And you can't run a machine built on trust after you've fired its architect. By the end of that week, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not yell, not fight, just leave, at the perfect moment, in the perfect way, and watch the whole illusion unravel on its own. The investor demo was supposed to be a celebration, a showcase of how Helios was redefining predictive intelligence. I wasn't invited to speak, of course. Ethan had assigned me the background role, quiet technical support, the kind that's invisible unless something breaks. I watched from the back of the glass conference room as Liam took the stage, all confidence and smiles, his slides glowing with numbers he didn't understand. The room was full, investors, board members, department heads, and a handful of employees pretending this was history in the making. Ethan introduced him like a proud father, calling him the young visionary leading Helios into its next chapter. My name wasn't mentioned, not even once. Liam started the demo, clicking through the interface I had built, explaining processes I had designed, reading from notes I had written. He was performing a script I had authored word for word. It should have been humiliating, but what I felt was oddly detached, like watching someone act out a play about my life. Then it happened. The dashboard froze mid-presentation. A familiar error message blinked in red. Predictive stream timeout. The same issue I had warned him about. Liam's face drained of color. Ethan stepped forward with a forced laugh. "Just a small hiccup, folks. The system is handling a live data push." It wasn't. The investors exchanged looks, whispers starting to ripple. I could have fixed it in seconds, but I didn't move. I waited until Ethan finally looked at me, panic hiding behind his polished smile, and gave a small nod, permission wrapped in desperation. I walked to the front, leaned over Liam's laptop, tapped 3 keys, and the dashboard revived instantly. A murmur of relief passed through the room. Ethan started clapping. "That's teamwork," he said. "That's what makes Aetherion great." That was my breaking point. I straightened, turned toward the investors, and smiled. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "what makes Aetherion work is the system I built, and the people you never see." The room quieted. Ethan froze mid-grin. Liam stared at me, wide-eyed. "Helios was my architecture," I continued. "Every algorithm, every contract, every integration, it came from 18 months of work that's never been credited." Someone in the front row, a board member I recognized from quarterly reviews, raised a brow. "I thought this young man led the project." "He arrived 5 weeks ago," I said calmly. "He's still learning how to log in." Laughter, nervous but real, scattered around the room. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Tracy," he said softly, the warning tone of someone desperate to control the narrative. "Let's keep this constructive." Absolutely, I said. Let's construct the truth. I turned to the board. I've spent a year building something you've all profited from, and today I realize something simple. I don't owe this company silence anymore. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and tapped send. Across the room, dozens of phones buzzed. My resignation email had just hit every executive inbox, including Ethan's. Effective immediately, I said. I'm leaving Aetherion. Ethan stepped toward me, his voice dropping. Tracy, we can discuss this privately. No, Ethan, I said, meeting his eyes. You've discussed enough behind closed doors. I placed my security badge on the table beside Liam's laptop, still open to my code, and stepped back. Good luck with Helios, I said quietly. You're going to need it. I turned and walked out, the glass doors closing behind me. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. In the reflection of the hallway glass, I caught my own faint smile. Not triumph, not anger, just freedom, finally unshackled from the illusion that hard work and fairness were the same thing. The Monday after my resignation, I woke up at 9 for the first time in years. No alarms, no emails, no emergency calls from Ethan pretending to be calm. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and watched the messages start rolling in. First from Liam. Hey, just checking. How do I access the vendor console? Then from Ethan. Need your input on transitioning certain credentials. By noon, the panic had begun. Clients who used to send me direct thank you notes were now copying half the executive team on complaints about broken dashboards and delayed reports. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Helios was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Highlight dependency. Without the person who understood its logic, it was a masterpiece with no translator. By Tuesday, a vendor reached out privately asking if I'd left the company. We're trying to renew integration keys, but no one here seems to know what you handled, he wrote. I confirmed my departure and said I'd be available for consulting soon. He replied within minutes. We'd prefer to work with you directly. I stared at that message for a long time. The truth was, I hadn't planned what came next. Leaving had been instinct, not strategy, but the more the chaos spread, the clearer my path became. By Wednesday, rumors were circulating that the investors wanted an audit. One of my old teammates, Nadia, called after hours. They're scrambling, she whispered. Liam doesn't even know how to access the core scripts. Ethan's furious. I could hear the hum of tension in her voice, that blend of fear and satisfaction only corporate veterans recognize. Good, I said. Maybe now they'll learn what value actually looks like. You know, she replied, half the office is rooting for you. I laughed softly. They should be rooting for themselves. I just did what we all dream of. By Thursday, Ethan's calls turned into voicemails. They started politely. Let's talk about a transition plan. Then shifted into frustration. You're under a professional obligation to assist. The last one simply said, we need you back, Tracy. I didn't reply to that either. I was busy drafting the framework for something new, my own company. I named it Langford Systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of building someone else's dream, I was finally constructing mine. I didn't rush. I knew panic would drive them to me soon enough. By Friday morning, Nadia texted again. Emergency meeting. Helios is crashing. Ethan's losing it. I smiled, sipping my coffee, watching the sunlight cut through my window. For the first time in my life, I wasn't inside the burning building. I was standing outside, watching it collapse exactly the way I'd predicted. Not with malice, not even satisfaction, just clarity. Systems fail when they forget who built them, and Aetherion had forgotten me the moment it decided I was replaceable. Now they were finally learning the truth, one frozen dashboard at a time. By Monday, they'd stopped pretending everything was under control. Ethan's number flashed on my phone before I even finished breakfast. I let it ring twice, then answered. His voice was clipped, rehearsed. Tracy, we need to discuss a consulting arrangement, short-term, just to ensure continuity. I could almost hear the board breathing down his neck. Continuity? I said. I thought Helios was thriving under new leadership. Silence. Then a sigh. You made your point. Let's be practical. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Send the proposal, I said and hung up. 2 hours later, I had the offer in my inbox. Temporary consultant, same pay, limited authority. I replied with my own version. Triple rate, 3-month minimum, no direct supervision, full control of vendor relations. Within minutes, Nadia texted, "You're insane. He'll never sign that." But he did. Desperation is the best negotiator. When I walked back into Aetherion's offices, the air was different. People looked up from their desks like I was a ghost. Even Liam stood when I passed. He looked exhausted, humbled in a way that no lecture could teach. "Tracy," he started, but I raised a hand. "I'm here to stabilize the system, not relive the past." He nodded quietly. I spent that first week reorganizing the chaos they'd made, relinking broken vendor pipelines, restoring client configurations, rewriting permissions. Ethan hovered in doorways, asking questions that sounded like apologies. I answered professionally, never personally. The more I fixed, the more obvious it became that Helios wasn't their property anymore. It was an ecosystem that recognized its creator. The clients, the vendors, even the algorithms, they all responded better when I touched them. It wasn't magic, it was memory. By week 2, the panic had subsided enough for Ethan to resume pretending he was in control. "We appreciate your commitment," he said in a meeting, voice full of practiced gratitude. I smiled, knowing he hated paying me 3 times what I used to earn. But this wasn't revenge, it was correction. By week 3, Helios was stable again, and new clients were reaching out, not to Aetherion, but to me personally. They wanted independent contracts, customized systems, my version of Helios. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. Word spread on its own. The woman who built what others broke was back, on her terms. When my consulting contract ended, I submitted my final invoice, the largest payment I'd ever received. Ethan tried to thank me. I just nodded and said, "You got what you paid for." Then I walked out for the last time, not as an employee or even a contractor, but as the proof that sometimes walking away isn't the end. It's the return clause they never see coming. A year later, my company occupied a corner office overlooking the city skyline Ethan used to brag about. Langford Systems had 6 full-time engineers, all of them people who'd once been ignored or underpaid somewhere else. We built custom analytics tools for clients who cared more about results than showmanship, and for the first time, I woke up every morning excited instead of exhausted. My phone buzzed constantly, new contracts, speaking invitations, interviews about female leadership in tech. I took a few, declined most. Success was quieter than I imagined. It wasn't champagne or applause, it was peace, the kind that comes from never needing permission again. One afternoon, while I was preparing for a client meeting, an email appeared from Fiona Mercer, a board member at Aetherion. She said Ethan was stepping down and they wanted to discuss me returning as Chief Operating Officer. I stared at the screen for a long moment, remembering the sleepless nights, the invisible labor, the way they'd clapped for my replacement. Then I smiled and typed, "Thank you for the offer, I'm not interested, but if you need consulting, my rates have gone up." She replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "You've learned well." Maybe I had. Months later at a conference, I ran into Liam. He looked different, softer, older. He said he'd gone back to school, that he finally understood what I'd been trying to build. He thanked me. I wished him luck and meant it. Revenge had long since turned into something better. Clarity. I didn't need to see Aetherion fail. I just needed to see myself free. Standing in my office that night, watching the lights flicker across the skyline, I realized something simple. The system didn't define me. I was the architect all along. Looking back, I don't see what happened at Aetherion as revenge anymore. It was revelation. The moment I stopped begging for recognition and started acting on self-worth, the whole balance shifted. Ethan, Liam, the board, they all built their power on the illusion that I needed them more than they needed me. Once I let go of that belief, I realized how fragile their authority really was. I learned that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the most strategic move you can make. The truth is, not every battle needs to end in total victory. Mine didn't. Ethan never apologized publicly. The company didn't collapse overnight, but the cracks remained, and he had to live with the quiet knowledge that his empire only stood because I once chose to build it. That was enough. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. You don't need to shout to prove your worth. You just need to stop giving your energy to places that don't see it. For anyone stuck in a toxic workplace or relationship, remember, value doesn't need validation. If they can't recognize your contribution, that's not your failure. It's their blindness. How to get started today. Start documenting everything, your work, your wins, your progress. Proof is power. Reconnect with someone who sees your value. Perspective is armor. Set one small boundary at work. Say no or simply stop over-explaining your worth. Write down what freedom looks like for you. Not fantasy, but a plan. I built something new not because I wanted to destroy the old, but because I refused to let it destroy me. If this story hit close to home, tell me in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for the next story of quiet people taking their power back.